It began, as most shifts do, in silence. The silence of an early morning when the world still lingers in sleep, and the mind feels heavier than the body itself. The alarm had rung hours before, and though I had risen, though I had sat before the desk with my coffee cooling by my elbow, nothing happened. The blinking cursor was the only thing alive on the screen, taunting me with its steady pulse. I had always thought of productivity as an unyielding wall that demanded brute force to climb. More hours, more effort, more sweat. But the truth I stumbled upon was nothing like that. It was not about exertion, it was about trickery, about knowing the game well enough to cheat at it without getting caught. The secret came to me in fragments, first as a whisper of doubt whenever I pushed myself too hard and got less done, later as a quiet realization when I noticed patterns others seemed blind to. People worked long hours, boasted of their exhaustion, wore their fatigue like medals. Yet their results were scattered, inconsistent, delayed. Meanwhile, the few who seemed to always be ahead, who delivered without strain, they carried with them an odd rhythm. They weren't pushing harder, they were cheating smarter. I learned first with time. Not the hours themselves, but their shape. To work when the mind is sharp, to stop when it dulls, and to never confuse presence with progress. I split the day into fragments, small sprints disguised as marathons. 25 minutes of full, merciless focus, followed by 5 where I would walk, stretch, or do nothing at all. It felt at first like weakness, like cowardice in the face of the grind, but soon the results mocked my doubt. Pages filled faster. Tasks dissolved into completion. The cheat was not to fight fatigue but to use it as a signal, a reminder that endurance without rhythm was waste. Then there was the matter of choice. Too many people begin their days by obeying the demands of others. Emails, messages, requests stacked high like chains. I once did the same, mistaking responsiveness for effectiveness, until I learned that productivity was not about speed but about direction. The real cheat was to choose the hardest, most important thing and do it first, before the world could claw its way into my attention. One difficult task finished early was worth more than 10 half-done tasks scattered across the day. That single act was the wedge that split open time, creating a current that pulled everything else along. But even these cheats were not enough without the greatest one of all, environment. I had thought discipline lived inside the mind, a fire one simply lit and kept alive through sheer willpower. But the truth is, discipline is fragile, easily stolen by noise, distraction, temptation. The real secret was to cheat by designing a world where the right choice was the easy choice. I silenced notifications, rearranged the desk so that only the work at hand remained, left books and notes in plain sight, hid the temptations in drawers and folders where the eye would not wander. The cheat was to build a space where the mind could flow unbroken, as if it had no other option. And then came momentum. I learned not to wait for inspiration was a cruel master, often absent when most needed. Instead, I cheated it into existence. I began small, with a line, a sentence, a scribbled thought, and let the act of doing summon the will to continue. What began as 1 step became 2, then 10, and suddenly the day had moved beneath my feet like a path I had not known was there. It would be easy to mistake these cheats for shortcuts, as if they were tricks that spared me from real effort. But they weren't. They were levers, shifting the weight of effort so that what once seemed impossible could be done without breaking. The world teaches us to measure productivity in hours, in the currency of exhaustion. But the cheat I had uncovered was this: productivity lives not in time but in energy, not in grind but in flow. Whoever learns to guard their energy, to direct it with precision, wins the game without ever appearing to struggle. Now the silence of mornings feels different. The coffee still cools by my elbow, but the cursor no longer mocks me. It waits, patient, because it knows the rhythm that will follow. I no longer sit down to force myself through a wall. I sit down to find the cracks, the hidden paths, the levers that move the weight of the day. The secret to hacking productivity is not about working harder, nor even about working smarter. It is about learning to cheat in ways the game allows, to bend the rules without breaking them, until the work itself begins to feel inevitable. That is the classic cheat, the one no one teaches yet anyone can learn, the one hidden in plain sight. It is not a trick of time but of perspective, not a shortcut but a shift in strategy. And once you see it, once you use it, there is no going back. You no longer measure days in hours, but in victories, small and steady, stacked one upon the other, until the impossible quietly becomes done. And yet, the deeper I sank into this discovery, the more I realized that the secret was not a single cheat, but a series of them, each layered upon the other, forming a web that carried me further than effort alone ever could. It was as though life itself was a system waiting to be gamed, its rules firm but flexible, its structure built for those willing to see the gaps between the cracks. One such cheat lived in the art of limits. Most people see limits as cages, as obstacles to be smashed through with enough determination. But limits, when chosen, are weapons. I learned to give myself boundaries, deadlines, constraints, rules that looked like chains but were, in truth, rails. The more I shrank the scope, the sharper the focus became. A blank day stretching endlessly ahead was a curse, an invitation for procrastination to slip through every corner. But a tight window, a self-imposed cutoff, turned hours into diamonds. Work that once sprawled and staggered now crystallized into completion. The cheat was to use limitation as fuel rather than fear. Then there was energy, that elusive currency that most squander without noticing. I once believed productivity was about time management, carving my hours neatly into segments. But time, I found, was indifferent. It flowed regardless of use. What mattered was energy. Guarding it became a sacred act. I cheated the day by front-loading what required the most of me and saving trivialities for when the body sagged and the mind dulled. Meals became fuel, sleep became strategy, movement became maintenance. It was not about being endlessly disciplined, but about placing my best energy where it mattered most. Another cheat lay hidden in the act of reward. We are creatures of impulse, built for short bursts of satisfaction. The world asks us to delay it endlessly, to wait for success far in the distance. But I learned to place small rewards along the way, moments of joy, fragments of rest, celebrations of the tiny victories. They were not indulgences. They were investments, each one tricking my mind into moving forward without rebellion. A piece of chocolate after finishing a page. A walk outside after solving a stubborn problem. A favorite song played only when a task was done. The cheat was not to grind endlessly, but to bribe myself into progress. And still another cheat hid in the illusion of choice. Too many decisions, even small ones, drained me before the real work began. What to wear, what to eat, where to sit, what tool to use, it all chipped away at focus. So I began removing choice. I simplified routines, automated the trivial, created defaults I could slip into without thought. Clothes that matched without effort, meals pre-planned, tools preset. Every small decision I erased gave me back a fragment of power for the larger ones. It was astonishing how much clarity grew in the absence of clutter. But perhaps the greatest cheat of all was this. I stopped trying to do it all. Productivity is not about being busy. It is about being finished. The world will always throw more tasks than a lifetime can hold, and the endless to-do list is a trap that keeps us running in circles. I learned to ask a single question each day: what truly matters? And then to give myself permission to let the rest go. The cheat was to win not by doing everything, but by choosing what mattered and leaving the rest undone. What surprised me most was how invisible these cheats were to others. To them, it looked like discipline, like talent, like some hidden reservoir of willpower I had unlocked. But I knew the truth. It was trickery, illusion, the art of bending the game in my favor. I wasn't stronger than anyone else. I was simply playing differently. And as the days turned into weeks, as projects completed themselves with a kind of effortless momentum, I began to see that productivity was never meant to be a war against time or against oneself. It was a dance, a puzzle, a series of clever cheats strung together until the work seemed to flow on its own. The grind was a lie, the struggle a myth. The real secret was not found in pushing harder, but in finding the hidden levers that made progress inevitable. That is how the classic cheat reveals itself, not in grand gestures, but in quiet adjustments that accumulate power. It is the secret no one tells you because it feels too simple, too sly, too much like play. But once you know it, once you use it, the world begins to bend in ways you never thought possible. What others call luck or talent, you will know as design. What they see as endless effort, you will know as effortless momentum. And perhaps the greatest cheat of all is that once you learn this, once you live it, productivity stops feeling like something to chase. It becomes something you inhabit, a rhythm you carry, a current you ride. The day no longer owns you. You own the day. Then there came the cheat I almost overlooked, the one so small it seemed trivial, beginning before I was ready. For years I had been a perfectionist, someone who would sharpen the pencils before writing, organize the desk before starting, research endlessly before daring to act. I thought preparation was noble, but in truth it was just another form of fear. The cheat was to lower the bar so far that beginning became unavoidable. One sentence, no matter how clumsy. One action, no matter how incomplete. I discovered that momentum, once sparked, was stronger than hesitation. A rough beginning carried me further than a perfect plan ever could. In this, I also found another trick: fragmentation. What looked like mountains of work were nothing but piles of small stones. The mind recoils at a mountain, but it can pick up a stone without complaint. I cheated myself by never facing the whole, only the part. I broke tasks into fragments so small they seemed almost laughable. Write a single line, draft a single idea, open a single file. And yet, stone by stone, the mountain dissolved beneath my hands. The cheat was to trick the mind into progress by never asking for more than the next step. But progress is not only about movement forward, it is also about what must be left behind. Another cheat I learned was the art of deliberate neglect. Some things are not worth doing, no matter how loudly they demand attention. There are calls that do not need answering, tasks that will wither if left untouched, obligations that serve no purpose but to drain. At first, I felt guilty discarding them, as though neglect was laziness. But in truth, it was clarity. The cheat was to waste no effort on what would vanish without consequence. By neglecting the unimportant, I cheated time itself, reclaiming it for what mattered. I discovered, too, that companionship can be a cheat, though few recognize it. Alone, the mind wavers, drifts, stalls. But with another, someone who holds you accountable, someone who reflects your effort back to you, the work becomes lighter. I found allies, not collaborators in the task itself, but companions in the struggle. A friend to check in with, a group to share progress with, a silent presence in the same room. It was a cheat against solitude, a way of borrowing another's energy when my own faltered. There was also the cheat of ritual. At first, I thought rituals were unnecessary, superstitions of the mind. But the more I practiced them, the more I realized their power. A certain chair, a certain pen, a certain song played softly at the beginning of work. These small consistencies whispered to the mind, "It is time." Rituals were not habits alone. They were keys that unlocked focus. Each time I followed them, my mind entered the state it had been taught to enter, almost without resistance. The cheat was not to force focus, but to summon it with familiar signals. And then, the final cheat, the one that surprised me most: stopping early. The temptation of productivity is always to keep going, to push until nothing is left. But when I stopped while still in motion, while still knowing what the next step would be, something strange happened. The next day, I began without struggle, sliding back into the work as if I had never left. Stopping at the height of clarity was not weakness, it was insurance. It was a cheat against tomorrow's resistance, a gift left for my future self. What began as survival tricks became, over time, a way of life. The cheats stacked upon one another, weaving into a system that looked, from the outside, like natural discipline. People began to ask me how I did so much, how I managed so many things with so little strain. I smiled, because the answer was both simple and impossible to explain. I was cheating the grind, cheating the old rules, cheating the very idea of productivity as pain. And the strange thing is, the more I leaned into these cheats, the more I began to see them not as tricks but as truths. The grind is a lie told to keep us chained to the myth of suffering. The real secret is play, design, rhythm. Productivity is not a battle but a game, and every game has its cheats for those clever enough to find them. That is the hidden truth of it all. Once you know the cheats, the game changes forever. What once felt heavy becomes light. What once felt endless becomes finite. What once felt impossible becomes routine. The day bends. The hours obey. And you, quietly, without anyone realizing, win.